Grief is real, y'all. And listen, if you are alive, you have either known someone personally and close to you or someone in your circle of influence who has passed away sooner than expected. I want to talk about grief, and I want to talk about grief with Tiffany Coleman. I know you may not know who she is, but by the end of this conversation, not only will you know who she is, but you will be marked forever by her story. This is the Sister Circle podcast, and I want to thank you for joining me. If you didn't know who I was before now, I'm Crystal Evans-Hurst, and I want to invite you to join me on the journey of what happens when we gather and circle up. I invite a sister or a brother to join me to talk about life, for us to keep it real, and for us to realize we're not alone. And on today's podcast, Tiffany Coleman is going to talk about her own story of grief, what she's learned, how she's powering through it, not only as a widow, but as a mother of 4 children, left to raise them alone, but how she is choosing joy and reconciling the real work of doing grief well, but not allowing grief to consume you. And isn't this a story of life together, all together? Life is going to happen because life's, that's what life does. But you and I get to choose over and over again in our life, through the difficult, through the hard, through the pain, through the unexpected, to choose to live. Here's what I want to say before I dive into my conversation with Tiffany. And if you know me, you've heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. You get to choose. I don't care what's happened to you. I don't care if your story is difficult or worse than other people's stories. I don't care how bad it is or how long it's been bad. I don't care if you have never been able to get it, quote unquote, right, or if you have tried and tried again and you just don't think that you have what it takes. I don't care how abused you were, how traumatized you've been. I don't care how life may or may not have dealt you a bad hand. I want to empathize with you. I want to support you. All of the content that we create, the goal is to help you live life well. But none of that takes away this one thing. You get to choose. And if you want to see change in your life, if you want to see doors open and windows cracked, you have to choose each and every day to do the best you can to live well. That will look different for you and I in different seasons. It will be easier in some seasons than others. It will be clearer at some points in your life than at other points. But the bottom line still stays the same. You get to, and you have to choose. My hope is that my conversation with Tiffany Coleman today will encourage you to choose, and that you will be left thinking, if she can choose, so can I. And regardless of your pain being the same or different than her own, the truth is the same for all of us. So here's to choosing to live. You only get one life. This is not a dress rehearsal. And every day I'm having to learn to do the same. So if life has been hard and dealt you a bad hand, this podcast is for you, especially if that bad hand has involved grief, loss, and pain. My hope and my assurance is that after you listen or watch this podcast, is you will be marked forever by the beautiful gift you have of being alive, of having breath, and getting to choose. Here we go. My conversation with Tiffany Coleman. Enjoy and be blessed. Y'all listen, there are a lot of things I like to talk about on here. Y'all know me. You know that I like to keep it real, and I like to talk about real stuff. And if there's one thing that we probably collectively share over the past 3 or 4 years, it is grief. We all have known and lost someone, whether that be a family member or a friend, a coworker, someone that we know at church, because of the pandemic and just time. Time has elapsed, and for most of us, there's been someone we know, 6 degrees of separation in our circle, somebody that touches our circle that we've lost. Grief has been a topic of conversation, and there are different modes of grief, because if you lost your mother, that's one level. If you lost a coworker, that's another level. If you lost your job or your home or your rhythms, those all can represent with change a level of grief. But there are definitely layers of grief that hit home more than others. And a close family member or your husband is a high, high, high level of grieving. And I wanted to have a practical conversation about this topic with someone who not only knows this grief, but has been able to, within her grief, articulate lessons of grieving well that we can all learn from. So, Tiffany, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for allowing me the privilege of having this conversation with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored to be a part of this conversation with you.
I came to know you because my daughter, Karis, she told me, she called me and said, "Have you ever heard of Tiffany Coleman?" And I said, "No." And she proceeded to tell me about your story and that I should consider having you on the podcast. And my first thought was, when did you say she lost her husband?
Mm.
And whatever time frame that was, I was like, is she even ready to talk? I mean, like, I'm glad y'all had lunch, but is she even, what makes you think that she would be ready to talk about that? And she told me, oh no, she's ready. Like, she's decided that this is something that the Lord, through tragedy, has invited her to have some open conversations about. And she wants to share what God has been teaching her real time and what she's learning real time. She's made the decision to open up her life so that other people can learn from her while she's in the middle of it. Your husband passed away in April of 2022. And what I didn't know until preparing for this podcast, this conversation with you, is that your mother passed away just a few months later in September of the same year. So you've not just experienced grief of losing your spouse, you've experienced grief upon grief of losing your mom.
Yes.
And despite that devastating loss, those devastating losses, you've decided that talking about what it looks like to grieve well and bringing people into your story real time is something that God has both burdened and impassioned you to do. Um, I know that you have your master's in counseling from DBU, so I know that you have um, a social intelligence about people and emotion and words to talk about those emotions and the journey that we have in our souls in life. You have the ability from a scholastic standpoint, an educated standpoint of these conversations. I know that you have your own counselor, you've had your own therapy, so you've done the work from outside and inside to have words to attach to this phenomenon of loss that we all at some point will experience. But I would love to start with just asking you, how did you, when did you, what did it look like for you to have the light go on that this story of loss was for sharing?
Okay. Sure. So, like you said, my husband suddenly passed away April 2022 on our daughter's 8th birthday. And
Mm.
so he had a pulmonary embolism, which caused him to go into cardiac arrest. And within a matter of 15 minutes of me calling 911, them getting to my house and loading him on the ambulance, he was gone. And the next day, like I said, it was very early hours of the morning. So his time of death was 1:41 a.m., which was our daughter's birthday. And so as I drove home from the hospital, just in utter shock that my life was nothing like I thought it would be, I remember turning into my subdivision of my neighborhood and just thinking, this can't be it. Like, I can't give up. I've got children. I'm young. God, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm going to fight as hard as I can. And that was not an easy fight, and I'm still in the battle of that process. But I knew very early on that I had two choices. I could lay down and die emotionally and spiritually with my husband, or I could pick myself up, fight with everything in me, cling to the Lord, and draw within every resource I had, whether it be my own intellect, a therapist, my community, and press through this season. And so it truly was an intentional decision on my part that I wasn't going to just stop living life. And as you stated, 5 months after my husband passed away, my mother lost a very long battle to cancer. And so even though we knew she was sick, that wasn't something that we anticipated, certainly not 5
Mm.
months after losing him. And so it just once again found, us in this middle of the storm. And I was like, Lord, what are you doing here? What am I doing here? And so I really just had to press in and decide, do you believe everything that you've said you believed when life was great and you had everything you wanted and God is good and he has a plan? It's really easy to say that when you have
Yep.
everything you want.
Yep.
But when trial comes, adversity comes, is that still what you believe? Is that still what you're gonna say? Because of who my husband was, I had a lot of people watching me, and so I knew, that this was the time. I could either back into the shadows, which is fine to do, and I did do that for, different periods of the grief process, but I knew God was giving me a platform, and I needed to take it and use the story and give him glory, and so that's just been really the meditation of my heart through this healing process.
When did it occur to you that what that meant? Like, and I know it's probably been a gradual process, but I know
Mhm.
you've made intentional decisions about what you share on social media.
Yes.
I know that you have been intentional about having the conversations
Mhm.
publicly. Even your willingness to join me. Um, that intentionality of not just say, okay, Lord, passively,
Mhm.
whatever you bring to me, I'm willing to still walk this journey out in faith and talk about trusting you. But you making the decision to, for example, share what's happening in your home and to
Mhm.
say, this is what this looks like. That is an intentional,
Yeah.
on the offensive move,
Mhm.
not reactive, but
Right,
proactive.
right.
So, what did it look like for you to gain the realization of what it looks like for you to proactively share your journey and what that meant you were supposed to do?
Mhm. So I very early on, I mean, I just went into prayer and worship. Really, I mean, it took the first 2 weeks of course, you've got all the processes. If you got to, make the arrangements, and I needed to get through the service and honestly just come out of the shock of my life being nothing like I thought it was going to be. But I felt the Lord tell me very early on, give me a year, give me 1 year,
Mm,
and fully commit yourself to grief. My life has literally revolved around grief, and I've been very fortunate that I've been able to stay home with my children and walk them through that process. And so, um, I just I arranged our life to revolve around godly biblical grief. And so God just began to show me what that looked like. Because I remember going to God and being like, everyone's telling me that I'm always going to be sad, that life is never, in some sense, going to go
mm,
back to normal or be good again. I'm always going to be grieved. And I was like, is that true? Because if that's true, I might tap out. I don't know that that's the life I wanna live, and so, the Lord just directed me to scriptures, and I began to research and find every scripture I could that talked about grieving and how, joy mourning may last for the night, but joy comes in the morning, and there's a
mhm,
season for everything under heaven, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, and so I just began to really unravel those things, and then, of course, equipping myself and my children with Christian therapists who could come alongside of us. But I really had to just be intentional and listen to the Lord because he was very direct with some of the things that he asked me to do. And I knew there was going to be a lot that I could share. And then there was going to be things that were private and that were for the inside walls of my home, especially when it comes to my children. I always want to protect their privacy, honor their process. They're really young. I have a 14-year-old son, a 9-year-old daughter. She just turned 9 2 weeks ago as we celebrated my late husband's 1 year in heaven, and then a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. So all still very young and unable to consent to me sharing their story. And I didn't want to do that and then have them have to come back and, face some things that maybe I decided to share that they didn't want to. But the Lord really guided me and just told me a full year, that is what you're going to do. You're going to read the books. You're going to read the scriptures. You're going to go to counseling. I did Griefshare, which is a course at my church. I surrounded myself with other widows who had been further along in this journey than me. I really just took everything that I could. And that, again, is my nature, just my clinical side. And I just needed the resources. And I believe the Lord knew that. He knows how my brain works. And so, in doing that, it gave me a plan and an outline as to what to follow, how to do it. And it wasn't perfect. That probably sounds like I just had all my ducks in a row and everything was great. There were many days where I had to go back to the drawing board and just say, Lord, help me. I'm lost here, or I'm stuck here, or I feel like I've been taken down by a grief wave. I had a great 3 days, and now I feel like I'm back at square one. And so it was a gradual process, but the Lord was so faithful to guide me every step.
You've mentioned it a couple of times, a year to grieve well.
Mhm,
And you just kind of gave some bullets of that. As I was
mhm,
going to ask you, what does that mean to grieve well? And you mentioned Griefshare,
mhm.
which, if you're listening or watching and you've never heard of Griefshare, it is at a lot of churches. And so
Yeah,
if your church doesn't have it, you can Google and find it. But
mhm,
it is it's a program that's designed to help you intentionally
mhm,
and walk through the journey of grief. I personally think that grief can compound unnecessarily when it's ignored. If
mhm.
you don't grieve well, if you don't leave space to walk through the emotional ebbs and flows of
Yeah,
losing someone,
yes,
and this is true of, I think, anything traumatic. If you postpone it, it doesn't go away.
right.
It but just gathers strength and becomes a tsunami. The
Yes,
wave becomes a tsunami.
yes.
But you mentioned reading books, surrounding yourself with other women who had your life story, other widows, and then grief share.
Yes.
First of all, I'd love to know, when you think about grieving well, are those the three prominent things that you talk about? And if so, that's great. If not, what else goes into or has gone into you grieving well for that year?
Yeah, I agree. I told my kids very early on, I think it was a few days after my husband had passed away, we went on a drive in his car. We just wanted to feel close to him. And I remember saying, "Okay, guys, how we grieve is gonna determine how we heal." And so the Lord put that on my heart very
Mm,
early on, that we could run from this, we can deny it, we can ignore it. It's not gonna go away. We can ignore it, but it's gonna be there, or we can walk through it, and it's gonna hurt at times. A lot of the time, it's gonna be a painful process. There's gonna be moments where you feel like it's never gonna end, but there is another side to it. So we made the choice to walk through it. And of course, I had to guide and lead them through that process because I'm their mother and their kids. But one of the first things I did was find a therapist for me and one for them. And we were in therapy within, I would say, probably a week after laying him to rest. And so that was
mm,
extremely important. I think that would be number one for me, is have somebody, whether that's a licensed professional counselor, which is who I had, or someone who specializes in grief, a pastor that you can go to that can speak life into you, but also hold you accountable. There were things that my therapist, when I would say something that maybe wasn't true, or I wasn't seeing it through the lens of Christ, she would lovingly confront that and help me work through and walk through why that wasn't, truth. It wasn't reality. It was my reality, but it wasn't the truth. And so that was very helpful for me. Another thing, there was a book that I read, and I believe my church gave it to me, but it's called Experiencing Grief by H. Norman Wright. And I have sent that book since, reading it to several different people that have reached out to me after a loss, be it a widow, someone who lost a parent. I had a friend who, her father passed away. And it's a very short read because, as you know, when you're grieving, you usually don't have the mental capacity to sit down and do anything for a long period of time. But it's a very short read.
no, you do
And
not.
yeah, it's a lot, but
There's a lot going on.
a lot going on. I think I read that book in like 3 days, and I mean, because the chapters were like 3 and 4 pages. I went
Yeah.
on walks, getting out, being physical, being one with nature. My husband passed away in the spring, and so it was a beautiful time of year seasonally, and I would get up religiously every morning and go on a walk, sometimes in the evening, and it was just my time to pray, to cry. I had a little fanny pack, and I would stuff it with tissues, and I would just walk my neighborhood, and I mean sobbing. My neighbors were probably concerned, but I didn't care. I prayed, I worshiped, I cried, and it was just my time to be alone with the Lord and really just lament. I needed that. I needed a lament, and I journaled. That was really helpful for me. But then my
Mhm.
community, I don't know where I would be without my community of friends and family who have surrounded us in ways that I never dreamed of. And the Lord has shown me, what it looks like to be the hands and feet of Christ, and the receiving end of it during this time. There are people who have done things that they won't even realize the capacity until they go to heaven. it just has ministered to my heart in ways that, I never would have imagined. But having a support system, and that looks different from everyone. Not everyone, because of my husband's reach and just the community, we did have a lot of people. That may not be the case. If you just have one or two people who you can call upon, speak life into you, pray for you. At bedtime was really hard for my kids. So if it was a hard night, I had like a group text, I would text it, can y'all please pray for the kids? I'm putting them down to bed. They're really struggling right now. A lot of tears, a lot of questions. And so just having that resource was really helpful as well.
It's so good. It's so good. There's so many things as you're talking. I'm just taking profuse notes. When you talked about going to see the counselor,
Mhm.
and you said you would say things that weren't true, you used the word accountability. That is
Mhm.
not a word that I think I've ever heard in the
Mm.
grief conversation. Because how can you hold somebody who's grieving accountable? Like it seems like you
An
think about
oxymoron,
accountability
yeah.
with weight loss and with discipline and with development. But I think what using that word does is implies that the journey of grief still a journey of development. It
Yep.
it is a way that you're going to choose to look at your life during
Yes.
one of the most traumatic experiences of your life, and how you walk through it, how you look at it, and what you learn from it can
Mhm.
actually support and positively influence the remainder of your days,
Mhm.
or it can eat away at the
Absolutely.
fullness of your life if you
Yes.
don't handle it correctly. And
Yeah.
so you mentioned if you were saying things that aren't true. I would love to know if you feel comfortable sharing if there were things that weren't true,
Mhm.
or a specific thing that you were thinking or you were
Sure.
saying that you had to have pointed out to you. Like what untruth or untruths did you that popped up that you had to actually, because really what we're talking about is like taking your thoughts captive. And so
Yes,
in life we have to do that, period. But I
absolutely.
don't think we realize in grief how many extra thoughts
Yeah.
come up that
Yeah.
you still have to use that spiritual discipline
Yes.
for in your life. Do you have
Yeah.
an example to share?
I do. And so going back to what you said about accountability, I sat my kids down really early and I told them, guys, we're going to grieve daddy and we're going to grieve him well. But there's still things that we have to do as a family and in society. So we're not relieved of those responsibilities. And so I had to hold them accountable and me accountable. I said, we can be angry, we can be sad, we can be bad. We're still going to be respectful to one another. There's still rules that have to be followed. There's still things that have to be done. And so the same was true of me. Um, in saying accountability, what I'm suggesting as well is that I knew I had a part. That while this was unfortunate and I did not cause my husband's death, I did have a part to play in how I was going to choose to grieve it and to move forward from it. So some of the things and the thoughts that I had that my therapist helped me walk through, one of the big ones, I would come in there and I would just be, sobbing. He's missing all this. He's missing, our daughter is still in
Mm,
diapers. He's missing her. She got potty trained. My other daughter started kindergarten. He is missing that. He's not here to see this. And I was almost putting grief on him. And so she reminded me that number one, he's not missing anything. He's on the cloud of witnesses. And there are things that
mm,
we may not even know he's getting to be a part of. But we
that's
for
so
sure
good.
know he's not in heaven sad. He's not in heaven crying, thinking, I'm not with Tiffany and the kids, not because he didn't love us. He loved us so well. He was the most amazing husband and father. But he's in paradise. He's in heaven with our Lord and Savior. And that freed me to say, well, you know what? If he's not in heaven sobbing and crying because he's not with us, not that I wasn't going to cry and work through grieving him, but I don't have to stay in a place of grief and sadness because he's not here. It gave me permission
Mhm,
to say, I can grieve him, but I can also move forward because
mhm.
Dwight has moved forward. He's not at the same. I always say there's heavenly Dwight and earthly Dwight. And I'll say, earthly Dwight would not like that. Heavenly Dwight doesn't care. Heavenly Dwight has a whole different
Mm,
perspective. Earthly Dwight maybe would do things differently because and I know that's all I know is earthly Dwight. So I can still think of, I mean, just about any scenario that
that's
I
so
go through on
good.
a daily basis, yeah, and think, oh, Dwight would say to do this, or he would say not to do this, or he wouldn't like that. But then I remind myself, but you know what? he's not here and this is my new life. And I have permission to even veer a little bit and do some things differently because earthly Dwight didn't walk this road I'm walking. So I have the permission to make some different choices that I know now in this season that are appropriate for our family and for me. So that was a big one, just almost feeling like he was missing out. And so feeling like, therefore, we had to do certain things or not do certain things. And so she helped me really get a hold on that. And then another thing was reminding me, I will never forget sitting in her office and she looked at me and she said, Tiffany, you fulfilled your vows. Your vows, your marital vows said, till death do us part. And Dwight passed away. You fulfilled that. You honored him. So now you get to choose. Do you want to rebuild and move forward in a healthy way? Or do you want to stay stuck? Because some people do, but it's a choice. And so I knew I did not want to stay in a place of deep grief. And I knew I was going to have to do some things differently in order to come out of that place, if that makes sense. So those were just some of the main things she had to help me walk through.
I love the idea of earthly Dwight and heavenly Dwight. When you were saying that, I was thinking about that's how we talk about ourselves. It's like 20-year-old Crystal would have never,
Yes.
but 40-year-old or 50-year-old Crystal, or we look at our children and we say, when I look at my children, I say, when you were 3, you would have never. I'm so surprised to see you doing this, that, and the other, because when I homeschool the kids, we say we accidentally homeschool them every year. Because every year I look at my husband and go, are we still doing this? But my oldest daughter, Karis, who you had lunch with,
Yes.
I've told her many times, she has exceeded my wildest dreams for her because I have seen the whole situation. And I'm like, listen, teenage Karis. It's like, so now when she's like managing rebuilding projects in her home or doing budgets for their business, I'm like, I remember like you almost got spanked over it because I was like, no, you have to learn Microsoft Office. And she said, I'm never going to use a spreadsheet. Why? You're an accountant, Mom. I am not a numbers person. I'm never going to use a spreadsheet. So I look at her and I say, man, like adult Karis.
Yes.
These are things that adult Karis is doing that teenage Karis was not interested in doing, did not want to do, fought me in doing. And we have to leave room, whether we're talking about one decade of our life versus another decade of our life, or we're talking about our life in time versus our life in eternity.
Yes.
Like I'm getting chills thinking about it. We have to leave room for the change.
Yes.
And isn't that what the Bible tells us? Like, whether we think about going to heaven before Jesus comes back or what will happen to all of us when we meet him in the air, we will, the Bible says, be changed.
Yes.
So we have to live with the idea of the reality of that change, that, like you said, your husband is not sad. Your mother is not sad. They're enjoying the presence of God. And even though it was unexpected and unplanned and the loss causes deep grief, they get to be different in eternity. And that means we get to be different since they've left us.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It's perfectly put. And that freed me not only in losing Dwight, but my mother as well.
Yeah.
To say, okay, I'm going to grieve, and I have been, but I'm going to grieve differently, because we hear these cliches in society. We hear the different things that people offer, and with good intentions most of the time. But what I came to realize is a lot of people offering me these things, these notions, hadn't been through the level of grief I'd been through. And so to tell someone, you're always going to be grieved. Well, that's not encouraging, or it wasn't to me. And of course, like, gee, thanks.
Listen, let me interject this. One lady at my church, and I hope she doesn't listen to this, but one lady at my church literally said to me, like, this is the night before her service. I just say, some people just don't know what to say. And I know she's experienced grief because of what she said, but I was like, you didn't learn the lesson. You didn't finish the class. She said, as she hugged me, she said, well, welcome to the club. What? Like, she said, we all gonna lose our mother one day. Sorry that this is happening to you, but welcome to the club. I said, what? I literally, in that moment, even though I hugged her back, I was thinking, somebody, somebody needs to tell you that that's not what you say. People do in needing to say something.
Right.
People say
Say anything.
anything
Yes.
and they don't think.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, so
I have
yes.
had some things said that I'm like, okay. And honestly, in those moments, in my heart, I just say, I don't receive that. I don't receive that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you speak it over my
Mm.
children, I'm like, we're not receiving that, guys. Like, throw that
Listen,
out.
I love that.
Claiming that because I've had people tell me, my daughter Kennedy, the one whose birthday he passed away on, she's never going to have another good birthday again. Her birthdays are going to always be overshadowed by sadness. And I just look at that little girl who is the spunkiest, happiest, peppiest child and genuinely has the joy of the Lord and has always from a very young age. And I remember praying and saying to the Lord, God, you can't let her lose her joy. She cannot lose
Mm.
her joy because of this, because her and my husband had a very special bond. He loved all of our children. But that little girl, she was a daddy's girl. And so God has really carefully, graciously walked me through things with her. But when people say that, I just say, you know what? I'm believing otherwise. I'm believing that because her dad died on her birthday, she actually has a connection to heaven that none of us have. And I told her,
Wow.
I
What a
said, your
perspective.
daddy, yeah, I said, your dad, April 5th will always be one of the best days of his life because it was the day you were born and the day he got to meet Jesus.
Wow.
Um, just giving her
That's
even the
amazing.
freedom to say, "Baby, you can enjoy your birthday. You don't have to be sad on your birthday." And you better believe we lived it up for her birthday this year. And because last year, the year he passed on her birthday, she did not know until the following day because I made the decision. I
Yeah.
left the hospital with my mom and I said, "She cannot know today. We're going to give her one
Mm.
more day." So I came home and you talk about fake it till you make it, knowing my
Mm.
husband was literally, gone. And I came home and we did a little birthday breakfast that I'd already decorated for the night before. And of course, deliveries are coming, flowers are coming because the word had gotten
Yeah.
out. She
Right.
wanted to go to the park. She wanted to get pizza. We did all of that. And so, but this year was the first year on her birthday she knew that he's not
Mm.
here.
Mm.
But she told me at the end of the day, she said, "Mommy, that was one of the best days I've ever had." And it's not because we've ignored what happened. It's not a denial sense. We talk about it, we work through it, but I also give my kids permission to be happy. I have told them, if you want to cry, you can come cry and I'll hold you and I'll wipe your tears. If you want to laugh, you have fun because that's what your daddy would want for you. So
Mm.
people say a lot of things, but we have to combat what they say if it doesn't line up with the word of God.
Absolutely. Well, inquiring minds want to know.
Mhm.
So you leave the hospital,
Yeah.
your husband is gone, you come home
Mhm.
and you're doing all the things.
Yeah.
What did you tell your children?
Mm. So my oldest son, my son Tristan, who he is now 14, but he was 13, I knew it was going to get out. I knew that he was going to find out, and I was keeping him home from school that day, which I hadn't planned on doing. And I knew there was no way I was going to get it by him, to not say something. So I took him into his room. I had a private conversation with him, and I just said, I called him Bubba. I said, "Bubba, I need to tell you something. Daddy got sick last night and went to the hospital and he did not make it. Your dad died." And I had to use those words. I knew as a therapist, I had to use concrete language that kind of sounds harsh, but I had to, really spell it out for him. I said, "Dad, your dad died." And so, of course, as you can imagine, it was the most gut wrenching conversation. And, his reaction was just as something that I don't think you can ever be prepared for as a parent. And I told him, I said, "I'm going to ask you to do something that is so unfair. We cannot let the girls know today," and meaning his sisters. And I said, "If you need to take a moment, if you need me to come with you in the room, if you want to talk, if you want to cry, I will do that with you. I'll let you can do that privately, but let's let Kennedy have this day. And then tomorrow I'm going to tell her." And so he's just the most sweetest, gentle hearted child. He's 6'5". He's massive. My husband was 6'7". So, but he's just a teddy bear. And so I know
The little baby boy is six.
he's huge. But if you talk to him, you're like, you're for sure 14. So he was so gracious and, it was unfair. And I knew that was, but I just didn't know any other way to go about that day. I knew he needed to know, but I knew it wasn't time. And so then the following day is when I told Kennedy and Ella and Chloe, my three little ones. Now my baby was 2, but I still needed to tell her, and I still wanted to tell her. And so for the little ones, I just said, same thing. Daddy got sick. He died and he went to heaven and he's not coming home. Because again, if you say he passed away or, he went to sleep or what, they don't understand what that means. I had to use very concrete language. The little 2 didn't really understand. Kennedy did. And same thing as Tristan, just a heart-wrenching reaction. It's like, how do you walk, something like that with your children? And I will say grieving as a mother has been 20 times harder than grieving as a wife, because I know intellectually that I can get through this. I know that the Lord's going to carry me. I know what the scriptures say. I know the relationship I had with my husband. I know what he would want for me. But as a child, you don't understand the big picture. You don't have the mental capacity and the spiritual maturity to understand that life is going to be good again. So it's been a trying process. And I've talked to their therapist a lot about that, kind of going back to accountability. I've told her disciplining children who are grieving is so hard because it's hard to know what is because of grief and what is because you're 8 years old and you didn't get your way, and so letting the Lord guide me even in that and just being like, God, help me to know how to react to this. Help me to know if this is coming from a place of sorrow and grief, or is she just being a normal kid that's not listening? And help me to know how to walk her through this and discipline her through this, because I didn't want this to be the event in our lives that was like, oh yeah, they were really good kids and then their dad died and everything fell apart. Or yeah, she was a really great mom and had her life together and then her husband died and everything changed. I didn't want Dwight's death to be the deciding factor for why our lives took a turn in a negative way. I wanted people to be able to say they've gone through hell and back, but the Lord has sustained them and his favor is over them. And we can see how God has turned beauty from the ashes. And so it's been such a multifaceted thing, but the Lord has, again, just been so faithful and gracious in walking me through that.
I love how didactic you are about communicating with your children. My daughter was, the oldest one was 4, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. I never forgot that my aunt, my mother's sister, who was a single parent, told me that when she and her daughter lived together alone, that she told her daughter, if you ever wake up and I'm not awake and you come into my bedroom and I'm cold, this is what you do. It means I'm sick. It means I probably am not going to get up. And this is what you do. Because she's thinking they lived on the East Coast and we didn't have family close by. So she's thinking this child doesn't need to be in an apartment with me if I'm dead and gone and not know what to do,
right?
Not know who to call, not to. And when she told me that, I don't even know at what point in my journey she told me that, if I was already a mother or not, but I just remember thinking how morbid and how horrible, like to tell your little child that. But me as a single parent, I'm thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
If you ever wake up on a Saturday morning and I'm not awake and you come and you call my name and I don't move and I'm cold, this is what you do. So when I would tell other people, my siblings or whatever, this is what I've told Karis to do, they said the same thing to me. How horrible. Like, that is just horrible. Why would you tell a kid that? Like, why would you? And I'm thinking, because it's real.
Yeah.
Like, as hard as it is, as crass as it may seem,
right,
it's real. We are by ourselves. And if this happens, what would be worse is her being in an apartment for 48 hours with a dead mother. And then y'all would say, well, that was horrible. She was there and, you were. So no matter what, it's horrible. I'm just trying to make sure I give her the tools so that in a horrible situation, she can function. As you're talking about what you're saying to your kids and how you're saying it and what you're telling them, or even what you ask of your oldest son, I'm telling you this, but I want you to hold it for a day. We're going to celebrate. That is a reality check. It is sensible, but it feels very uncomfortable to
Yeah.
think, oh, it's like that poor 13-year-old boy,
Yeah.
who had to hold it together for 24 hours, the best he could. But really, what is the alternative? For him to find out later that you held it from him for a day, or for him to find out from someone else? Like,
Right.
none of the decisions, none of the steps, none of the actions, none of the outcomes here are pretty.
They're not.
Yeah.
They're not. And he got text messages. I took his phone for a little bit because I didn't want people to text message him. And sure enough, after I told him and let him have his phone back, someone texted, "Hey, I heard your dad died. Is that true?" Because a lot of people did think it was rumors. And so I'm so thankful that I had the forethought to do that. And I know it was just the Holy Spirit, because originally I wasn't going to tell him, but then it was like the Lord told me, That's not going to work. He's going to find out." And so, I allowed him to have a safe space to grieve. I just told him it can't be out here because Kennedy and Ella and Chloe don't know. And as the grieving process has continued, I've had many talks with him. Now he's 14, he'll be 15 in September. And so I've tried to be as honest, age appropriate wise, as I can with
Yeah.
him. But I told him, I said, "Tristan," because a lot of people told him, "You're the man of the house now." And I told him at the very beginning, I said, "Tristan, I want to tell you right now, you are not the man of this house. You get to be a child because that is who you are. You're my son, and you're going to get to grieve as a son, and you do not
That's
have to
good.
carry my emotional weight. You don't have to do anything in this house or for me that I did not expect you to do when your dad was alive. He still has chores, he still has responsibilities, and naturally there are things that he has done. I mean, he's always been a really sweet big brother, but I think it's amped up a notch knowing, because he's told me, "Mom, I just feel so bad the girls didn't get daddy as long as I did." So I see him
Oh.
doing things. Yes, I see him doing things that maybe he wouldn't do if Dwight were alive, but that's because he's prompted to do it, not because I've made him do it. But I relieved him of that stress and duty very early on, and just assured him, "You're not the man of this house. You get to still be a teenage boy." And honestly, I have seen him thrive. He's gone through a lot this year between losing his dad, my mother, who he was extremely close to
Mhm.
because before Dwight and I got
Mhm.
married. Tristan and I had Tristan in college. And so we lived with
Mhm.
my mom for 3 years. So she helped
Mhm.
me raise him. He suffered 2 injuries in basketball. He broke his arm and dislocated his kneecap, which he's currently in physical therapy for right now. But I've just reminded him through this process. I said, "Tristan, I think that the Lord is trying to speak to us and show us that people may come and go in our lives.
Mhm.
Hobbies may come and go. We may be injured and you can't do something you love, but the Lord is never going to leave us. He is the faithful constant in our life." And so my kids are I say unfortunately, but they're having to learn things earlier than a lot of people do in life. But I really know that the Lord is just pruning them, and there's going to be fruit that I've already seen come to grow off of them, and it's going to continue to. And so as a mother, as painful as it's been to watch them walk through this process, I am so encouraged to see the resilience that they've had. And I know that it comes from the Lord. And I know it's been because of my response and how God has led me through this journey. But it's given me so much hope for them, because I tell Tristan all the time, I'm like, if we can survive this, I feel like we can survive anything. And so it gives you a perspective, even when something happens, you're like, "You know what? Not that it just because it's smaller than death, it doesn't matter," but it puts it into perspective, and it gives you a different framework to combat that, issue from. So that's been really encouraging, I believe, just as a mom.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I anticipated that he probably got the "you're the man of the house now"
Mhm,
situation, but I was gonna say, I think that the day, the first day without your husband, that you told him
mhm,
that your husband had gone, to heaven, without you saying he was the man of the house,
mhm,
I don't think he will. I'm no counselor, but I just think the fact that you, because of his age, um, made sure he had that information and had it first. There was
mhm,
almost a, for lack of a better way to say it, a knighting of him,
mm,
just as the oldest son, as the one who needed to know first, as the one who could handle the information, as one who could be trusted to
right,
handle himself through a very difficult day for the benefit of a sibling. Like, that implicitly, I think, entrusted him at a
mhm,
level with information that you felt like was right to share with him and that he could handle. And without you saying, you're the man of the house, or I need you to be the good big brother, or I need you to, all these different things, you giving him that ahead of time implies that you thought enough of who he was and his ability to handle that. And so implicitly, it's telling him, listen, I knew you could handle this. And that I think is a saying that you are ready for a level of responsibility without putting it on him. It
Right.
implies she trusted me. She thought enough of me.
Mhm.
She communicated with me. When my brother Anthony was in college, I'll never forget when he was struggling and just wanting to be home. He had gone far away to college and wasn't sure if he wanted to do college or whatever. I'll never forget the day my mother, in a conversation, said to me, "What do you think? Do you think we should let him stay or let him come home?" And all I knew is my mother asking me? did my did my mother think enough of me? And I think at that
Right.
time I was probably, let's see, he was in college. So I was in my mid-20s, probably early to mid-20s. But still, that was the first time I remember with her entrusting me to
Right.
give me information or ask me a question that basically said, "Hey, I think you can handle this." And it was good for me to know she saw me that way. It
Right.
was good for me to know she. So I think, even as we talk about walking through grief and the conversations that we're having with our family, how we have these conversations is not a vacuum. They don't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
What we say, how we say it, when we say it, implies something to who we're saying it to.
Absolutely.
And every conversation beyond what we say means something else. I love that. You talked about celebrating your daughter the first day without Dwight.
Mhm.
What did the celebration look like this year? How did you celebrate her? And how did you, if you combine the celebration of him in heaven or remembering him
Yeah.
on that day? What did that look like?
So again, I was really intentional. I wanted to honor his 1 year in heaven, and really even just the fact that we made it 1 year on earth without him and what that took. And so I orchestrated an event so he was a coach at Dallas Christian College, and I invited the people who had walked with us through this season. His funeral was very large, and I knew I didn't want anything of that capacity. And so just the people who have walked with us, family and friends, we all met out at DCC on April 1st. So I did it before her birthday, before
Okay.
any parties. I wanted to go ahead and do that, honor him, but then also, move past it. And so I ordered bracelets. I had bracelets made. He had his favorite book was called Chop Wood, Carry Water, and it's just about getting through life, getting through hard times. And then a saying he had, which was "Feed on the wood." And so I put that on a bracelet, handed those out. I made a 20-minute slideshow because I love videos and pictures. And what it was our year. It was mine and the kids' year. So it started off with videos and pictures of the year that we had, and then ended with some sweet pictures of us as a family. And even the songs I picked, "Joy in the Morning," was one of the songs. And then Lauren Daigle's "Rescue." And then there was another one,
Mhm.
but the theme of it was, we're coming out of this. And so I played that, we worshiped, and I asked the pastor who spoke at his funeral to come and just give an encouraging word. And so we just gathered, we had a good time, and I felt at peace doing that. We did a little balloon release, me and the kids afterwards, and I walked away just feeling like we did it. We did it. We
Mhm.
honored him, we grieved him, and now we're going into celebration mode. Because if you ask me what is April 5th, I'm going to tell you that's my daughter's birthday before I say,
Mm.
"Oh, that's when my husband died." That's my daughter's
Wow.
birthday. And that is what we did on April 5th. The kids stayed home from school. I asked them if they wanted to, and of course, they did. And
Like, what? We get a choice? Yay.
and I was doing Kennedy's hair, and I remember I said, "Kennedy, do you want to hear the story from the day you were born?" And she said she did. And so I started to tell it, but as soon as I started talking about Dwight, she said something, and I just felt the Lord say, end it. Like, she's not sad right now, and this has the capacity to take this morning on a different course. And so she changed the topic, so go with it. And that's something I've had to learn through this process. There's times they want to come in and sit and talk and look at pictures, and then there's other times they don't. And so even reading their cues. But we spent the whole day, she had a day of fun. She wanted to go to Sephora, which how my 9-year-old knows what Sephora is, I don't know. But we
Listen,
went to
they know.
Sephora. She got to do a little makeover. We went to lunch. We got pedicures. People, again, were so sweet, sent gift cards and money for us to go out and just have a full day of fun. And then this last weekend, she had a birthday party with her friend. So I separated the two events. And like at his 1-year thing, I did not mention Kennedy's birthday because I wanted to keep the two events very separate. But I felt like we both had to honor and celebrate them both really well in their own right and own capacity.
That's so good. I mean, one of the things I know that you're intentional about, you wanted to grieve well. You've said that multiple times in the year since his passing, but you've also wanted to intentionally hold space for joy. And you've been so great to give practical examples of what that looks like. Being intentional about the grief space, being separate from the joy space. And when the joy space is there, going full on unapologetic, even though those joy and grief dates coincide. I mean, there's no other way I can think of for that to be mostly poignant, for the dates to be the same, but you've chosen even in that to say, I can celebrate them and separate and go full on joy and full on in remembrance of my relationship and love for my husband separately. I would love to know, have your children in this last year ever had questions, or, and maybe being critical is not the right way to phrase that, but have they said, we don't want to, like the way that you are moving forward, or the way that you're holding perspective, or the way that you're making room for joy, and the way that you are, not perfectly and not without emotion and not without your bad days, but intentionally choosing to move forward. Have your children had any questions for you? Like, I feel like we're moving too fast, or they don't want to do something the way you think it's wise to do it. Have you had to deal with that in any regards, or are they just pretty much following your lead in the matter?
A little bit of both. I would say for the most part, they're following my lead. I think children by nature want to be happy. They want to have fun. And so a lot of times they'll read the room, like when a little kid falls, and not always, but if the parent freaks out and they, scream and the kid starts crying, but if the mom's like, okay, come here, let's dust it off. And all right, you're good to
Yeah.
go. And not, refusing to
Yeah.
see that you got hurt. But we know when our child is genuinely hurting and when they're just waiting for a reaction. And so I believe the same is true in grief. There's times where they're looking at me like, what is she doing? My kids have seen me cry. There's a difference in crying and weeping, and anyone who's lost someone knows that. They have not seen me weep. Those are private moments that I've had with just me and the Lord, but they've seen me cry. But they've also seen me laugh and dance. We love to have dance parties at our house, and they've seen the joy, and they've been a part of the joy. But yes, there have been times where, for instance, bedtime is a trigger. It can be a trigger. And they'll maybe start to talk about things. And I'm talking about my little girls. And with Kennedy's birthday coming up, I remember she told me, I don't want to celebrate my birthday. That's a sad day because that's the day Daddy died. And so I hear her heart, and I'm never going to, tell her that that's not a valid thing to feel. But in that moment, just like my counselor did with me, I challenge her and I say, Ken, I know that it is so sad that Daddy died on your birthday, but what do you think Daddy would want for you to do? Do you think Daddy would want us to go and do something fun? Do you think he would want us to stay here and be sad? And so it's not that they look at me in the moments and think like, why are you so happy? Because they're usually happy with me. But then there have been days where they're not, doing quite as well. And I sit with them and I acknowledge that space. And I've always said, give space for your grief. There's times where you need to sit in it, but there also comes a time where you get the Kleenex, wipe your tears, stand up, dust yourself off, and you move forward. And so I think that they've been able to watch me do that. So they've in turn done it, but they've genuinely wanted to really progress. I mean, my son has even said to me like, Mom, he said to me one day, he goes, "Your Instagram is so sad." And I said, "Well, I'm not trying to make it
Oh,
sad, but," I said, I know. I said, "I'm gonna hide you from my stories." Um, but I told him, I said, "Tristan, it's okay to have moments." Because especially that first year, I let myself share the videos, share the pictures, and, give little glimpses of maybe what I was feeling at that moment. And so I just explained to him, this is my way of expressing my love and my grief towards daddy. And it's looked different for all of us. So there's been times where I've been sad and they're like, "Okay, are we done with this now?" And, it depends. Yeah. But I'd say as a whole, they've really followed my lead, and they've done
Mm.
a really good job of just being able to see that while we are grieving him and he is deeply missed in this family, that we all know he would want us to move forward. He was the biggest push forward kind of a person when times get tough, dig deeper. And so we just know what he would want for us. And I think that that's helped as well.
So good. You are a young woman who lost her husband unexpectedly. Um, where do you feel vulnerable, left open?
Mhm.
Um, you know, that list could be so long, but you are obviously um, well situated. And by that, I mean you have community. You immediately went and looked for support with counseling. You engage with Griefshare. You um, are emotionally educated. So these things in your heart have a place, but in your head, they have a place.
Sure.
But you are now a woman who is parenting children, even with the support of community, but parenting
Mhm.
alone. Has this unlocked any, even if you've been able to deal with them, any feelings of vulnerability, chinks in the armor? For many women, that could look like just being alone, and fear because of being alone and
Right.
being vulnerable. Or for many women, it's financial. For many women, it's if they've been at home, they didn't have a job. And so now it's like, what do we do? It could look like community. Sometimes if a spouse passes away, the community that you had fit both of you. And
Right.
now who are you in those spaces
Yes.
without your spouse? If,
Yeah.
we had a community group, but it was all married people, like where has it left you, even if you're able to handle it
Mhm.
and if you've been able to move forward in it, where you've noticed, what do I do about this?
Right. Well, I've said really from the start, with grief, you have the main loss of losing the person. There's a lot of secondary losses. I mean, everything changed in my life. And so, whether that be relationally, financially, I mean, I stayed home. And so, my husband was a sole provider. Like I mentioned, he was a 6'7" big guy. I mean, the biggest teddy bear. But from the outside looking in, he's someone that you would look at and you wouldn't mess with. And so, one thing that has been the hardest for me, I feel very uncovered. I lost my protector
Mm.
in the flesh. I know I still have my protector in the spirit. And that's what the Lord
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of, is I'm your
Mm-hmm.
provider. I'm your protector. I'm your sustainer. But in the natural sense, of course, we all want to feel safe. We all want to feel loved and heard. And so I don't have that person right now in this season of life that I can come to and say, "Hey, the car's making this weird noise. What should I do?" Or, "This child isn't listening," or, "We've got 10 different appointments and I'm only one person. How can we arrange the schedule?" And so just I'm not having a helpmate. That's why I used to always call Dwight, because we were a really good team. We really respected and honored each other. He valued my role in the home, never made me feel like, "Well, you're just staying home with the kids." He knew how much work that took. And I was working during different seasons in our marriage, and he would beg me, like, "Please, please come back home." And so I lost that in losing him, and the secondary losses, really relationally, family dynamics shift and change, and that's very painful. And it's been a process that I've had to grieve separately from grieving him, and knowing that the Lord is going to take me through grieving those losses, just like he's taken me through grieving the loss of my husband. And so when you lose someone very close to you like that, I know I wasn't thinking about everything else that was going to come subsequently. But now that I'm a little over a year in, I'm much more aware of that. But absolutely, just losing him in the flesh caused a ripple effect for so many things in my life to be uprooted and challenged and changed.
So what does it look like even managing the kids and their schedule? I mean, what does it look like for you to figure out those adjustments, and while you can't inhabit his space fully
Mhm.
because you are only one person,
Right.
what does it look like for you to navigate figuring that stuff out? Because I can see that the secondary losses, blow by blow, moment by moment, are they can almost be stumbling blocks for throwing you back into, I don't want to deal with this. This sucks.
Yeah.
This is hard. I can't figure this out. I wish I didn't have to do this by myself. And I
Yep.
wouldn't have had to do any of this, if my husband wasn't here. And I think this is how people get in this cycle too, not only of grief and re-grief, but also moving into potential areas of bitterness and anger. Because
Yeah.
why is this happening to me? Why do I
Yes.
even have to do this?
Right.
He could have been taken from me later, like later, when the kids were teenagers and he didn't miss their firsts. And so at that moment, when you stumble into a secondary loss,
Hmm.
what does it look like for you to practically figure it out? Like, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I've had on one of my many walks, I remember telling God one day, this isn't fair. Why did he get to go to heaven? Because that's how I was looking at it. I'm like, he's in heaven and he's fine. I'm here with children who are grieving and sad and misbehaving and dealing with drama and finances and everything. You know, I'm here stuck with that. Why is it that I'm the one that's got to, deal with it? Or and so in those moments when a secondary loss causes a reaction, an emotional reaction, again, allow myself to feel it because it's not fair. But we all hear, life isn't fair. And so in that moment I get to decide, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that this isn't fair and that this isn't even how it's supposed to be. But because of the fall of man, here we are. Um, I'm going to acknowledge that. This is unfortunate. This isn't fair. This is not what I planned. But I'm also going to acknowledge that, God, you've got good things for me and that you're not done until it's good. And this isn't good. So you're not done yet. And I have the
Mm,
hope that what is
mm,
going to come from this is going to be better than where I'm at. And you're going to redeem and you're going to rebuild this. And I know that can sound really cliche and like, oh, well, that's just the perfect Christian answer. Trust me, there have been many moments of, sobbing out moments of just, Lord, why? He was a great man. We had a great family. Why we were doing things in your honor? Why is this our plot? And so I have felt that and I have really worked through those different things. But just like when I have sad moments, I allow myself to have frustrated moments and moments of anger and moments of, you know what? People are maybe not treating me or doing things the way that I know Dwight would want them done. And my boundaries are being crossed and I'm frustrated with certain scenarios. But I'm also going to step back and say, worrying about this it's not giving me life. It's not bringing me life. So God, I'm going to surrender this to you. You
mhm,
know the solution. You know what needs to be done. Please direct me and help me in that. And sometimes I have to surrender the same thing 50,000 times.
mhm,
It might be every
mhm,
morning, it might be that thought comes, but a phrase that I started saying really early on, I think I heard it in a sermon I was watching, but when I would start to see my mind going down these rabbit holes of this isn't fair and why me and anger, I would say, I have the mind of Christ. I have the mind of Christ. And sometimes I would just say, Jesus, like, Lord, you're good. Jesus, help me. Because there have been very dark moments. I don't want to negate the severity of the grief. Yes, I have chosen joy. Yes, the Lord has been faithful to meet me. But here's rock bottom. And I feel like I was below it those first 3 months were brutal, brutal. And every month it got a little lighter and a little easier. But then I'd have a grief wave and I'd think I was doing good and I'd get knocked back down. So I don't want to skim or gloss over the fact that it is a process and it is hard. And my therapist has said this, my clinical background has given me an advantage. Just like if you were a medical doctor and your kid's sick, you may not have to rush off to the pediatrician because like, oh, okay, well, it might be this. And you could, kind of do some home remedies or something to help. So I've been able to combat some of the things that me and my kids have experienced just based off my own clinical knowledge. And that's an advantage that I am so thankful I have.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't necessarily the norm. And I want to be really just transparent in saying that, because I don't ever want anyone to look at how I've handled grief and think, well, I'm not
I
doing
could never do that.
yeah, because there's been plenty of moments where I'm not either. In the moments that I am, it's the Lord's grace and also just the things that he's equipped me with personally.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned at the beginning, and your transparency and your willingness to share your journey is amazing at this point, and it's still such a tender season. You're in the middle of it. So thank you for that. But one of the things you said at the beginning was about the importance of community and how supportive your community was. As people who are listening who may not have personally experienced this level or maybe this close grief,
Mm-hmm.
or experienced it in as tender of a season, and are wondering, beyond our own need for community, how we can be community for people who are experiencing grief, but specifically widows, mothers, maybe in this season. And I know everybody's different, but if you had to say, hey, listen, if you want to know what you can do right now in someone's season of loss, please consider this.
Mm-hmm.
What are some practical ways we can be community for others if we haven't experienced the loss, but we want to be helpful?
Sure. That's a really good question. And I think it looks different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Something God imparted on me really early on. I was, frustrated that certain people I thought would be there weren't, or they weren't there in the capacity I wanted. And someone who had experienced a very close loss told me, she said, Tiffany, allow the Lord to use people and their giftings to bless you. And that might look different for each one. So someone might be able to babysit and they can't give you a dime. Someone may be able to make a financial contribution. Someone may be able to drop off a loaf of bread. Like, let people meet you where they are. And so when you're trying to be that person, tap into what is your gift? What is something you're good at? And if that's, hey, I am really good at making lists and I'm going to go to the grocery store to get my groceries. And don't say, is there anything you need me to get you at the store? Say,
too many questions. Too many
yes,
questions.
I'm going to the store. What can I get you? Because
Yeah.
that also allows someone to accept that help. I caught on really early the people who were genuine and their,
They
desire to help.
pursued helping you.
They pursue it.
They
It
didn't
was
just say, hey, if you ever need anything, give
yes.
me a call.
Because they're not going to call. I wasn't going to call. I was not. Number one, I was probably going to forget. But number two,
Right.
you're already in a vulnerable state. You already feel like you're taking so much. So I wasn't going to pick up the phone and be like, hey, you know what? I really could use X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to the store. What can I get you? There is a sweet woman who literally every 2 weeks she goes to Sam's Club. And every 2 weeks she tells me, I'm going, send me your list. And I keep like before Dwight died, I just had a running grocery list on my phone. And I know she's genuine. I'll screenshot it and I'm like, thank you so much. And without fail, and I trust her so much now at this point, I just let her in through my alarm system on my phone. And she comes in but then I have friends that can babysit. So if maybe you don't have the financial means to go to the store, if you already have a kid and you want to say, hey, I'm taking, Johnny to the park. Can I come by and grab, your kids? Or I'll come and sit at your house and the kids can play so you can go have a moment. So just tapping into whatever gifts you have and whatever resources you have. I have people, I haven't seen their face, but they were generous and sent a financial contribution that was so helpful to me. So wherever you're at, whatever you can do, think about that. And I would also say, don't offer something that you don't intend on following through with. I don't just mean that monetarily, in general, because it was very devastating and very hurtful for me, especially early on when I was expecting something that someone said they would do, even if it was just, hey, I'm going to come and watch your kids so you can go to the store. And then I just wouldn't hear back from them. Or I'm going to drop you off a bill. I just would think like, my gosh, I'm already like, at my wit's end, I'm already stressed. I'm already feeling alone. And now I had my hopes up in anticipation for this relief and it didn't come. And we all, things come up. And so if something does come up, just be honest. I'm so sorry. I did not bring dinner over tonight, but I'm sending it this date and arrange that. So tap into your gifts, your resources, and offer whatever that looks like. But I know for financially, meals, helping me babysit. I cannot even tell you the amount of people that have taken my kids to dance, basketball. I mean, it's just, I literally would not have been able to get through this year without the people being willing to sacrifice their time above money, time to just help me. I have 4 kids and one of me, and I can only be so many places. So that's been really helpful.
That is so helpful for you to share that with us. And I love that we say things because we mean well, and we might even be intended on doing whatever it is that we say. But I
Right.
know to connect your intention with the when, the what, and the how, like
Yes.
that is where the rubber meets the road. And my intention helps no one. My action, though, can
That's what.
definitely
Yeah.
fill in the gap.
Yes.
Tiffany, it has been such a pleasure to get a chance to connect with you, to get to know you, and to have you share your story, your insights, your journey, and what you've experienced so far in this podcast today. And I just want to thank you again for your willingness to recognize the gift that, I mean, you could have shared about this later, 10 years from now, but the fact that you're willing to, and that God has prompted you to talk about it right now when you're in the middle of it. I think that the tenderness that allows people who hear to know that, like, she's not doing this because she had 10 years to heal. She's doing this in the middle of healing, and sharing what she's learning in the middle of the process gives an extra dose of hope and encouragement that in the middle of our grief and in the middle of our hardship and in the middle of the unexpected, that we can still learn, that we can still grow, and that we can still encourage and share with other people. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for availing yourself to what God wants to do through you in this season. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor, and your family, from Karis, who I consider a sweet, dear friend of mine, to even watching, I remember getting ready and watching your dad's sermons after losing your mom, worshiping to your brother's songs. I mean, your family has been a part of this healing journey. And I would text Karis and be like, I just heard a sermon from your grandpa that helped me so much. And so y'all have ministered to me. I was at Pink Impact, which you spoke at, and you've ministered to me from afar in ways that you don't even know. And so it was an honor to get to come on here. And I just really thank you for that opportunity.
Well, you are so welcome. And I look forward to continuing to connect with you in the future. I think that, you know, sometimes our entry to the things that God has planned for us with this great weaving together of life that He does. You said, and I wrote it down, He's not done until it's good.
Mm,
God redeems. And
yes.
sometimes, as you stated at the beginning, there's a time for everything. Our timing is not God's timing. Our plan is not God's plan. Eyes haven't seen, nor have ears heard what God has planned for those who love Him. And sometimes, as a part of that plan, there are things that He did not do, that He did not cause, but He definitely will use. And I
Amen.
definitely see that God is weaving together something that you did not plan, that you did not see, that you would not have asked for. But it doesn't mean that He is not good and that He's not done until it's redeemed. And
Amen.
I look forward to seeing God's redeeming work in your life and in the life of your children. And I want to applaud you and encourage you and just agree with you that God is He's at work doing something in you. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of that journey. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much.
much.
Thank you.
Listen, that conversation was life and life indeed. I know that you are better from having heard it. I know that you are stronger from having met Tiffany and experienced it. And my prayer and hope is that you have tools to move forward in your life, regardless of what's been overwhelming and hard. And listen, grief is overwhelming and hard. I know. I have firsthand experience. I also know from firsthand experience that sometimes the only way to deal and heal is to make space, it's to get away, it's to cultivate the time that you need, the environment that you need to make room in your life to rest, to recover, and catch your breath. Often this looks like exactly what Tiffany described. It looks like your community, it looks like a good counselor, it looks like journaling, it looks like making room to feel the joy and the pain. But sometimes and often it means you make room to connect with other people that you know well, and sometimes other people that you don't. I love creating space for you to make room. I do this in a variety of ways. We do this by creating the space for you to pause and listen or watch podcasts. We do this by creating space inside of the membership, the inner circle, for you to connect with other people who want to live and grow and live life with intention. But this year in 2023, I'm creating space for you to get away. And I would love for you to consider joining me in California this year in 2023, in October, to be more specific. The last time we held a retreat, there were a couple of women who came who, as a gift to themselves, gave them space to retreat as space to be, space to grieve, space to cry, and space to remember to live. And I heard from both of these women multiple times throughout the retreat that it was exactly what they needed to remember to stay connected to life. Whether or not you're grieving, we all can remember and be encouraged to stay connected and intentionally enjoy and live with purpose in our lives. And so if you need space to laugh, to cry, to connect, if you need space to receive a hug, to give a hug, to enjoy some sunshine or some great scenery, I want you to know you are personally invited to join me. Again, it's October the 19th through the 22nd. You can find out more information by going to thesistercircle.com/retreat. You can come alone and leave not alone, or you can come with friends and tighten up that friendship. All I can tell you, it's even hard to explain. When you make room to come away with me, to come away and meet new people and have a new experience, making room in your life can be magical. There's some things that don't happen when we stay on the treadmill of life and don't give ourselves a break. Well, I've created an opportunity for you to make space, to take a break, to make new connections, and to have a brand new experience. Again, that's thesistercircle.com/retreat. I know that everybody can't do it, and that's okay. I want you to know I'm providing the space for those of you who can. If you can't, whether it's the date doesn't work, if your money is funny, or if you just don't think that that's for you this year, can I encourage you to create your own space? As much as I am creating a space for you to enjoy at that retreat, I know that sometimes this space is created in your everyday, in the long car ride, sitting in your closet on the floor with your bag of chips. I know that sometimes it is parking in a random parking lot before you get home, or aimlessly looking at the magazine rack in Barnes and Nobles just because you need a few minutes. Whatever it takes for you to create space in your life or make room to be, do that. And if you are able to come away with me for that special space in October, just know I'd love to see you there. Here's to making room for all that life brings, the good, the bad, and the ugly, knowing that God is for you. He does not waste anything, and He does redeem. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you decide to make room. We'll see you next time.